So imagine this. What if your poetry was so beautiful that people called it light on the hearts, but at the same time, it was so radical it got you branded a heretic? Well, that was the reality for a 13th century mystic poet. His work was both celebrated and condemned, and in this explainer, we're going to find out why. I mean, just look at this. On one side, his fans called his poetry light on the hearts, but on the other, his critics labeled him a heretic. These aren't just slightly different opinions, they're polar opposites, describing the very same man, Afif al-Din al-Tilimsani.
So this is the central puzzle we're looking at. Was he a saint or a heretic? A brilliant poet or a dangerous blasphemer? To really get to the bottom of this, we need to understand the man himself and, the ideas that made him so incredibly controversial.
Okay, so before we dive into the whole philosophical firestorm, let's just start with the basics. Who exactly was Afif al-Din al-Tilimsani?
A lot of what we're exploring today comes from this modern edition of his collected poems, known as his Diwan. This collection is amazing because it gathers the works that have actually survived for over 700 years, giving us a direct window right into his mind.
Here's a quick rundown of his life. He was born in Tlemcen, which is in modern-day Algeria, and he traveled all over before eventually settling in Damascus. And you have to understand, Damascus back then was the perfect place for a firestorm. It was this buzzing hub of intellectual and religious debate, the kind of city where his radical ideas would either take off or get him into some serious trouble.
And this brings us right to the heart of the matter. This one single, powerful idea that was the source of both his genius and all the controversy that hounded him.
So what was this belief? What was so radical that it could inspire such intense devotion from some people and just absolute fury from others?
The core of it all is this concept called wahdat al-wujud, which you can translate as the unity of being. It's a really profound mystical idea. Basically, it suggests that everything in the universe, every person, every star, every grain of sand, isn't separate from God, but is a direct manifestation of God. The classic analogy is the ocean and its waves. Right? The waves look like individual things, but they aren't separate from the ocean. They are the ocean, just expressing itself in countless different forms. That's the essence of this belief, one single, unified reality.
And you can see this philosophy woven right into his poetry. He writes, "I witnessed your selfhood in us as one, great in attributes and names." See what he's doing there? He says he sees God in us. He's not talking about some distant, far-off creator. He's describing a direct, personal experience of the divine within everything. For his followers, this was a beautiful, sublime truth. For his critics, well, this was incredibly dangerous.
And the biggest critic of them all, the man who had become his main intellectual opponent, was one of the most famous scholars of the time, Ibn Taymiyyah.
Our source text actually spends a whole section on this clash, which just goes to show how big of a deal it was. Ibn Taymiyyah wasn't just some random critic. He was a brilliant, fiercely traditional scholar who believed that al-Tilmisani's ideas were a direct threat to the very foundations of Islam.
And Ibn Taymiyyah, he did not mince words. He called al-Tilimsani profligate and straight up accused him of blasphemy. His logic was pretty sharp. If you totally erased the line between the creator and the creation, which he argued al-Tilimsani was doing, then what happens to all the moral and religious laws? They become meaningless. In his view, it was pretty much the most dangerous idea you could imagine.
So, you see, this wasn't just a personal disagreement. It was a fundamental clash between two totally different ways of seeing faith. For the mystic al-Tilimsani, truth came from direct inner experience. But for the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, truth was defined by established scripture and law, period.
And yet, despite these powerful condemnations and the very real danger that came with them, al-Tilimsani's poetry survived. So the question is, why? Why does his voice still echo more than 700 years later? The journey his words have taken is just incredible. Take a look at this. On the left, that's a page from a fragile, centuries-old manuscript. On the right, a page from the modern printed book we're using. His poetry made it through because, for hundreds of years, people thought it was too valuable to lose, and they painstakingly copied and preserved it for the next generation. At the end of the day, his legacy endures for a few key reasons. First, just the sheer beauty of his language. It's undeniable. Second, his poetry is still one of the most powerful artistic expressions of that unity of being idea we talked about.
And finally, he represents this voice that dares to challenge the boundaries of religious thought, forcing a conversation that honestly is still relevant today.
Which kind of leaves us with this big final thought. The whole story of al-Tilimsani really forces us to ask, where is the line between divine inspiration and dangerous heresy? And maybe, more importantly, who gets to be the one to draw it?